Alright, so welcome to a midnight edition of the Artis Opus YouTube channel. I've just sat down and thought I'd fix this piece of terrain, and I thought, why not make a video? So this is a tired, you can probably nearly see exactly how this was made. It's pretty much broken already. So that is a very tired old piece of terrain. It's kind of been used with pigments and stuff. I'm going to fix this, I'm going to make it look pretty, and I'm going to show you how. So this is our old forlorn piece of terrain, and hopefully we can do something to make it beautiful again. Okay, so because this is a big piece and I'm going to be coming in and out a lot, I wanted to make sure that we had kind of everything in shot. I'll do my best, but it's a bigger one, so we might have to move the camera up a little bit further away. I've just got to fix this first. Shouldn't take too much. I'll pop it back onto here, kind of force the pegs back in and then glue around it. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect because it's terrain, and that's one of the lovely things about terrain. Okay, so I probably should have put that on video rather than time-lapse. That was actually easier than I thought. Forced it back together. You might have noticed my head appearing in the shot. That's because quite a good tip. I wanted these to have a joining point because it's just going to make things more sturdy. As cool as it is to have a gap, it's not like, it doesn't add to the feel of the piece particularly, I don't feel. So I just got in there and blew the super glue because it's still fluid, and that's just helped it get somewhere where I wanted it to get. So we can prime this, which we'll just use Chaos Black for, and then we can come back and begin the painting. Okay, so I've hit this with a little bit of Chaos Black, but because of the nature of it, I don't want to obscure detail under a spray, so I'm just going to use my airbrush to give it a coat of, it doesn't have to be a primer, it could be any black. I'm however going to be using Vallejo. So just kind of hit it wherever, but bear in mind that it's nicer to hit it from above. So putting down a little bit of detail here in terms of there's going to be some areas underneath that don't get hit and they remain darker. Let's try and, if I do this on a side, you'll be able to get a better indication of the angle. It's quite hard for me, but it's good for the camera. So that is the angle that I'm airbrushing at. And the reason for that, I'll show you in a second. Just the same as dry brushing from an angle, but you're doing it with an airbrush. That is to make it so, let me get a pointy brush. So the tops areas of these recesses are going to be left in shadow, and the bottom areas will be caught by it, be caught by the light in this kind of, that's what we're imagining in this scenario. Equally, these are going to remain dark, and the top areas will remain brighter. Okay, so I've just grabbed the lightest thing that I had to hand, which is Ultron Grey. And again, you may notice that this airbrushing I'm doing here is not what you would regard as finesse work to any degree whatsoever. I'm doing it pretty rough and ready. And what I'm going to be doing with this stage is just picking some of the more raised areas on the model, and I'm hitting them with a very unsubtle big blotch of white. Now the reason for this is that I want this to punch through the stage that is going next over them, which will be a brown. So don't worry about it being delicate. You can tell, obviously, I'm putting zero effort whatsoever into whether it's delicate. Maybe a little bit more around the top sections on this flat bit of cork, but generally speaking, what you're doing here is not anything particularly subtle. I'm just looking to add some visual interest in terms of contrast with the next step, and we're going to be obscuring the majority of what we do here anyway. Here we go. Okay, so we'll carry on around the model doing that, and that's going to help us with our next stage. Hit these with some super unsubtle white, and then hopefully what we're going to get is that is going to show up in terms of our next stages. We really want this to punch through and add some spots of visual interest because the ground isn't consistent and I don't want things to kind of look uniform. Okay, so we're going to be continuing with our Dawnstone, but we're on to the hairy brushes now. You'll see that I am ruining my beautiful texture palette, but this is what they're made for. So we're just building up some layers here, and in the future maybe we'll get to learn something because we had some excess there and tried it next to another colour or whatever. Grab my dampening pad. If you're not familiar with how these work, they allow you to put a reliable amount of moisture on your brush. One drop there, work it in, and we are good to go. So you just want to make sure that it's not overly saturated. Your one drop of water has been worked thoroughly in, and then we'll use that to make sure that our brush isn't dry before we start painting, and we'll use it throughout as well. Things are going to slow down now. We're not using the airbrush at this stage. We will come back to it though. It's absolutely fine to jump between one and the other, and let's rock on. So just want to test it here on these bits, and then we can bring it to our rocks. This is a heavy coat of this dry brush. The terrain piece is going to be quite light, quite bright. So this is kind of a, it's halfway between a dry brush and I'd call it an overbrush, which is a slightly wetter, heavier dry brush. What I'm going to be doing as default while I work my way around the model though, is to use it on the rough areas with the sand. And then once I've taken off the immediate excess there, I'll move on to the rocks on the rest of the miniature. I'll show you a little bit how I'm going to approach the kind of the archway here. So exactly the same, work off my excess on these stones here. We're just adding free texture as well as removing the excess from our brush, so there's no negative to any of that. And we're doing this, but I'm going to keep my strokes kind of top down for exactly the same reason that I airbrushed top down. I want the light to be hitting the lower areas of these recesses and not any of the paint to be landing in the upper areas, which I want to remain shadowed. So we'll take this approach all over the model and then come back for the next stage. So I have popped a bit of Ulthuan Grey on the palette with some Dawnstone. So we're just using colours that we've already used so far, nothing complex. I like to do this for coherency's sake, and one thing that's worth noting is anything that you put on with a brush is just it's gonna go on more heavily than it would do with an airbrush. So it's fine to repeat the same colours over the same colours, and you might even notice that you get kind of what looks like you've used two different colours there. One of them's just going on heavier than the other, and that'll be evident in terms of kind of how it appears. So mix them together a little bit, and standard Series D stuff, but we've got a lighter stage this time, and we are now trying to do fancy dry brushing. We want to make the most of the gorgeous texture on this slate. Make sure our brush isn't overly saturated at any point, and I'm going to go around with a kind of a lighter grey on all of the areas on this, and then we're going to come in and just add a higher proportion of the Ulthuan Grey for a couple more steps. Our light is coming from the top. I've made some specific efforts in a couple of places, like I kind of buffed in the middle of this section and in the middle of this section. I just wanted to have a light source. Here is a cock up, that's an error. That's why you should always test your brush elsewhere before taking it to the model. But all over, we've got some lovely kind of pre-work done here, including all of these stones being picked out gorgeously. And so what we want to do is make sure that we don't delete that in the following steps. Okay, so the first stage, we're going to be using Doombull Brown. And we're also going to be using Glaze Medium, which is kind of a wonder product from Vallejo, which makes anything a little bit more transparent. So I've got 5 drops of Glaze Medium in there. There is kind of a There's a bit of an art to this stuff, but what I'm going to aim to do is just have enough glaze medium to make things a little bit more kind of milky and transparent. This Doombull's a lovely warm colour. So I haven't done all of the dry brushing on the model yet. I'm going to try and do this airbrushing fairly carefully, but it doesn't matter if a little spills onto the stones. In fact, I'm kind of gunning for that. I've got one more stage of dry brushing left with the stones, 1 or 2 stages, in fact. And the reason for doing the airbrushing now is because what we're going to get is any overspill is going to come onto these rocks, which is just natural. They'd be getting earth kind of working their way up onto them anyway. But I don't want it to cover the very peaked areas that would be hit by a final dry brush. So I'm doing this stage now, and then I'm going to go back to the dry brushing for a final highlight, and that should allow the kind of the earth to look like it is in the recesses of the rocks. The other way. So our next stage is Skrag Brown, which is a colour that I'm a real fan of. Again, it's a lovely warm colour. Pop a little bit of thinner in here. And a little bit of Glaze Medium too. This one, it doesn't matter if it's slightly more opaque, so less transparent, less see-through, but I still want to kind of maintain that work that we put in. Dry brushing all the raised areas, all the stones, all the pebbles, all the details and the protruding bits. The nice thing about having a texture palette here is you can see how your mix from your airbrush kind of behaves on a textured surface, which is a really good indication of kind of what it's going to be doing on your model. So I'm going to go quite carefully here because I want to really make sure we're not obscuring detail. I think that's okay. I've not removed the previous colour from the brush because it's not really an issue to me at this point. It's quite a big difference between the colours anyway, so it's fine if we have a bit of crossover. So you can see our interest kind of building up on the piece. Much as with previous steps, what we're going to be doing is just taking the colour that we've last used with the airbrush, and we're going to be repeating it again with the brush, which is still the same XL Series D. So I'm going with Skrag, I'm not going with the Doombull, I'm quite happy for that, just to remain in the recesses. We could always add a wash later if we wish, kind of push the depth in those areas. The one thing about doing our last couple of steps with the airbrush is you just don't end up with quite as saturated colours. Still got some moisture in there, let's add a little bit more. Always work it in. You don't want a puddle sitting on top of the foam, otherwise you'll get exactly the opposite of the purpose of the dampening pad, which is to kind of release a nice reliable amount in there. You could step down brush sizes here if you wish, but I'm going to be continuing with the XL just because I like using big brushes. Really carefully here. Skrag Brown is potent, it is bright, and we don't want to kind of cover over too much of what we've done on the stones by accident if we get a little bit kind of dry brush happy with what's going on. This is a pretty quick stage though, and it is nice and fun, so do make sure you enjoy it. I just love this colour, so I'm happy to be doing anything with it. Just here, I'm going to give ourselves a quick kind of once over with that. There's a very nice progression through these colours from Doombull. You get a bit less saturated, but the three do work really, really nicely together. And you can step up to whatever you like at this stage. You can step up to something a bit more orangey, or you could indeed go to bone. So particularly these areas here where we did go bright, we want to make sure they're hit. And we will for sure involve a more whitey or bony colour in our final highlight stage, because this isn't picking up hugely. We're making a bit of a difference here, but there's not as much as we'd like. So a tiny bit here, obviously a lot's come out there, which I wasn't quite expecting. Tiny bit in, work it in, we've got our previous colour in our brush. Make sure that we know how much is going to be leaving our brush. When we take it to the model, that's about right. Perfect. So softly on the areas that were our darker Doombull Brown areas, and then the areas where we have our Skrag Brown base coat rather than our Doom Brown base coat, you can definitely afford to go a little bit lighter there, and we can indeed come back and cover them a little bit more in a future stage as well. I've stepped down to a large rather than the extra large. This isn't just for size reasons, it's also because this still has some brown on it, and I want this to be pretty clean, crisp, and kind of bright. So I'm going to work it off. We're going to take real care with these steps. This is going to be the most easy stage of the model to screw up, so I really want a very little amount of paint on the brush. But what we can do is magic. So any of those areas where we've had overspill of the brown, we can just make sure that the bits that are sticking out are bright, crisp and white, and it just helps it look more realistic when the earth has worked its way into the recesses rather than sticking out on the very most protruding bits, which should be the brightest. So anywhere like this in particular, you can see we're just getting to add some clarity. Now make sure to be fairly careful that you don't overspill onto the other areas. If you do a little bit, it's not the end of the world, but generally speaking, this is just for the grey sections. All right, so that stage is done, and it has really done some work. So we've got that proper kind of top lit, top down effect going on the stone sections, looking pretty good, nice and striking. Like I say, I picked out the essential areas as just kind of a point of interest, just to show you how I go about doing that. Some white on our brush. Remove most of it, check it on the back of our thumb or somewhere where we can really get a good idea of what's going on, and then a little buff. That's basically it. You can do it as many times as like. The more you do it, the more you'll get kind of that central glow. And you can keep it top down if you want and just kind of do this again and again, up to you entirely. And as far as the top goes as well, areas like this where you've got some like big soft details, it's not hard edges. This is a hard edge, this is a soft edge. Just kind of treat it gently. Go over and don't be afraid to spend a little bit of time gently building up to a very, very soft, kind of subtle edged dry brush there. Okay, for last stage, I have mixed black with a little bit of Huldra Blue from scale 75, and then I've just added water to it until I've got it to a consistency that I'm happy with. If you can see how that's behaving on our texture palette. Add a little bit more water, and I'm giving just kind of little bits of the model a hit with this in order to increase the contrast and the depth in the recesses. So go all around it doing that. Anywhere I just want to look a little bit deeper, or I think looks a little bit kind of dry or brighter than I would wish for it to be, I'll do. And also if you hit the rocks with it, I hope I can show you this. I hit them once at the back, clean my brush, just got water on it now, and then you can fade all of that in there and you'll get some gorgeous kind of pooling in the recess sections. I'll do that all over the entirety of the model. This is optional, it's just a stage that I'm particularly fond of doing and find really rewarding, so I tend to do it on most terrain. Okay, so we're looking pretty snazzy. What we're going to do now is just do some basically decoration. I love this stage. We're going to be doing it with Tufts. I have a rather large selection. I've not quite picked them yet, but I'm going to have a little play and then we'll pop up exactly the ones I use, because I may or may not have a slight problem with how much I love Tufts. So I'll pick some winners and then we'll pop them up on the screen. You can see how I go about the placement. I will be placing them mostly in the recesses and areas that will be moist, and then they'll be more sparsely populated in the open sections. Okay, so that is looking significantly different. These reds are showing up as a bit mental on camera. They're not quite, especially these kind of poppies or whatever they be, they're not quite as crazy, but they do really pop. And the entire thing looks really nice now. So I've used a few different colors of tuft to have, as I've said, lighter, drier ones towards the outside, greener ones to the areas that are more sheltered and therefore have more moisture, and then super green ones kind of spotted around sporadically in the areas that would really be getting kind of more moisture or less wind or are more protected. And then the flowers I've kind of just popped wherever I think they'd look nice, really. Really pleased with it. I think it's a proper good job of a renovation of an older piece, and it's ready for the table. All right, look at all that mess in the background. I do love tuft. I'm definitely going to add some more tufts onto this. So we are finished. That's turned out super well. Let me just knock the light back a little. There we go. Really pleased, solid renovation, and you could fade that into your gaming table however you wanted. If you are doing this for gaming, then you could put flock around the edges if it's a green table, or just basically behave around the edge, whatever helps it fit in with its environment. We've used some really solid techniques there, stuff we've covered on the channel before, so lighting from the top, therefore shading underneath, stippling, dry brushing, kind of different pressures, different textures. We've used transparency a bit, and we've got to involve airbrushing, which I'm super pleased about. You can expect to see more of airbrushing on the channel in the future, as well as washes, edge highlighting, glazing, a load of the stuff that we've not covered yet, and of course the staple of dry brushing. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and please like, subscribe, spread the word, check out the Artis Opus store where you can see all the products I've used today, and we'll catch you in the next video.